What happens to the rich under socialism? This is a question a lot of people have, myself included to an extent. You always see jokes about eating the rich, sending them to guillotines and the like. I think the thumbnail of this video actually references that. But what would really happen to them? Well, I think under a more incremental move towards socialism that I advocate for, which is very controversial in many leftist circles, the rich class of people will sort of slowly wither away. The benefits of being rich essentially no longer become restricted to the rich. In a more revolution-based socialist future, things might be different. Now, I have learned that the use of the term revolution in this context is a bit misleading. It can refer to a drastic overnight toppling of our system, like you imagine a revolution to be, but it can also simply mean ending capitalism by whatever arbitrary means and replacing it with something else, something hopefully better. But in the case of something violent and bloody, yeah, I could see a lot of people demanding that we go full Louis XVI. The question is then, do the rich deserve something like that to happen? Do they deserve it for intentionally gaming a system to give themselves more wealth than they need at the expense of other people's lives, health, sanity, and comfort? Do they deserve it for the abject practice of privatizing profits and socializing losses? If more of the public were aware, would we deem it a moral crime to allow, in the US alone, 20,000 citizens to die every year because they want to be slightly more rich? I don't know. I don't know. Do you know? Let me know your thoughts below. Otherwise, let's get into the video.
Nothing. You want the honest answer? Not much will actually happen to rich people under socialism. They'll genuinely—
That's audacious. Let's try and interpret this before we continue. What do you get when you're rich? You get autonomy. You get time. You get access to doing fun and interesting things. You don't have to worry about where your next meal is coming from, ever, regardless of whether you choose to work. You don't have to worry about going bankrupt due to healthcare costs because you have money in the bank. Like I said earlier, under socialism, the people who were previously rich under capitalism still get all of those things. It's just that now, everyone on Earth hopefully gets those things too. Now, a capitalist might argue that, well, the rich person worked really hard, or perhaps slightly better, invented something people found useful enough to pay them enough money to where they never have to worry about anything ever again. I think socialists would argue that you shouldn't need to, invent the automobile for you and your family to never have to worry about food or housing or healthcare. If possible, those basic necessities should be accessible to everyone. I would argue that it can be demonstrated that this is possible. A lot of the scarcity that we're seeing under our current capitalist system is artificial. We could guarantee healthcare to everyone. We could guarantee housing to everyone. We could guarantee access to food to everyone. We could provide people with more free time, more autonomy. We could guarantee all of the basic necessities a person could need to everyone today under capitalism, and the rich would stay rich. These types of things are not as expensive as you think they are. I talk about it more in a previous video, you can check that out if you want. Some capitalists would likely then go on to say that regardless of whether or not it would be possible, we still shouldn't do it because the reward of having to never worry about your basic needs ever again should be dangled in front of everyone because it incentivizes people to win capitalism by creating something great, and without that reward, people would just not create new things or invent new things or be motivated to do great things whatsoever. And that's an argument that I don't buy. There are plenty of arguments as to why innovation and cool stuff would still exist under a more collectivist system. I think I made a video about it a long time ago. I don't remember anything that I said, but you can check it out if you want. I'll shoot some reasons off the top of my head. Number one, some people are just very motivated and ambitious. They will still be motivated and ambitious under socialism. Number two, social recognition will still exist under socialism, and that will be something that people will want to strive for. Number three, under socialism, you won't have 40 million Americans living under poverty. That's 40 million additional people who now have the opportunity to do great things. An opportunity that doesn't really exist for them today. Globally, you're talking about an additional billion people. Think of how many brilliant minds will never see a college campus. How many incredible artists we will never see or hear about because they are artificially kept poor under capitalism. Number four, under socialism, everyone will have more free time. You don't need to get loans of hundreds hundreds of thousands of dollars from your parents to try and do something. I do believe in entrepreneurial spirit, and I think it will continue to exist under a non-capitalist system. And when you're talking about billions of people no longer living in poverty who have a lot of free time, they will want to create cool shit. They will want to do cool shit, discover cool shit, invent cool shit, create incredible art. And number 5, there is literal historicity to people being motivated and innovative under more collectivist frameworks. Even under capitalism right now, public works in the form of research colleges, scientific institutions like NASA, these are public. They don't operate at the behest of the profit motive, and they still do great things. So for me, it's not just a moral thing. I do think this type of system would just be better in every conceivable way, including in regard to people inventing new things or being ambitious in other ways. Now, with all that said, I do think some people would and should have more. I do believe in resource scarcity, just not this type of resource scarcity that we're seeing under our current capitalist system. But you shouldn't have that much more, well beyond what you need to live a comfortable, fulfilling life, while people are still suffering, arguably due to your actions. It's a complete 180 from the way capitalists see the world. It's about understanding that a person's failures and successes are not on an island, that the world around you, the zip code you were born in, the people you meet, the parents you had, etc., all have a huge effect on who you end up becoming, and that individual achievement and failure is fundamentally a fallacy. So yeah, that was a bit of a tangent to say that under socialism, the best parts about being rich no longer become reserved for the rich, and that reserving them for the rich is pointless at best and horrifically cruel at worst. I don't even know if that's where he's going with this, but let's finally start the video.
Be fine. A socialist president wouldn't make Jeff Bezos eat 100 billion Amazon boxes until his little tummy explodes.
Although maybe we should do that. Allegedly, in a video game. I'm joking. Satire.
We're not gonna bring out the guillotines and pull up Forbes on our phones. There aren't gonna be free Rotten Tomato boxes from a local organic farm dropped around town. In a socialist society, a former billionaire or CEO would either stay in their position if their workers think they did a good job, or they'd get voted out. Their salary and earnings would probably be reduced so that the gap between the lowest paid and highest paid employee in any company goes down. If they're sitting on a dozen or so empty properties and new housing isn't enough to satisfy everyone's needs, they may only be allowed to keep 2.
Boo fucking who, dude?
Maybe even 3. If they got wealthy doing something despicable, like dumping toxic waste somewhere, their wealth may be used to fix the things they did wrong. And honestly, that's pretty much it. Nothing will really happen to the rich, as in the actual people. The category of rich will change, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
Anyway, for some reason, a lot of people are worried that socialism means going on a rampage. And the first thing we need to talk about to correct that impression is that most socialists aren't dumb. Every piece of socialist writing that has ever existed is constantly emphasizing that individual wealthy people are not the problem.
Yeah, that's a huge part about what I like about these socialist ideas. The problem I have with conservatives, the problem I have with capitalism, that whole universe over there, you know what I mean? Is that it focuses so much on individuals, when really we need to be worrying about systems. And in my experience, that's what socialists do, and leftists, and a lot of progressives in general. So until I see conservatives doing that, I can't give any credence to the things they say. They hyper focus on individual anecdotes, individual people, and that's just not the right way to go about these things.
Socialists in general recognize that almost anyone in Bezos' position would do what he does. Same goes for Zuckerberg or Musk or whoever your favorite billionaire is. Exploitation and environmental destruction and doing just about anything for a buck is the name of the game under capitalism, and that's what we take issue with. Not that Jeff specifically is the one doing it.
That's a very, very good point, and I hope more people hear what he just said. That is a very good point.
This doesn't stop what these billionaires are doing from being wrong, but most of it is just perfectly legal, and all we'd want to do is change that to put an end to it, not to punish people. Just make the awful stuff stop. Most of us socialists take issue with the system of power and wealth accumulation that is capitalism, not the individuals who inevitably end up at the top. To put it differently, there are millions of jerks out there that are just as evil as Musk, but who are basically powerless simply because, under this economic system, power can only consolidate in a few people's hands.
Very, very good points.
And I can tell you're skeptical.
No, not anymore. Maybe 9 months ago when I first started this project, I don't know what I would say. I'm very curious to eventually revisit some of my earlier videos on this project, just to laugh at them and see all the dumb shit I said. But no, at this point, I'm fully on board. That makes total sense to me. And if it doesn't to you, if you're at an earlier stage in your development or you're a capitalist yourself or whatever, tell me what about he said there you take issue with. I'm very curious.
A lot of people are worried about what socialism might look like after a century of Red Scare rhetoric. It also doesn't help that past socialist
another very good
revolutions,
point, you know?
just like the liberal revolutions that gave us capitalism, have often been bloody affairs. It's normal to be concerned about that when people like me talk about making fundamental social and economic changes. The history of big changes hasn't often been a series of peaceful transitions of power. I think most historians would agree that's never been the case. I will point out, though, that there's a tremendous amount of bloodshed required to keep the current system chugging along. Billions of people are kept in artificial poverty when we have enough food and housing for all.
Exactly,
enough
dude.
jobs that need doing so that no one needs to be unemployed.
Yes, sir.
Enough resources to provide everyone with healthcare and education.
Yes.
Hundreds of thousands of protesters are brutalized by police and army forces when they complain that life is too expensive and the air is getting unbreathable. Not to mention how gruesome wars are constantly waged for the profit of a few defense and oil companies. But even given all that, it's still perfectly normal to be worried about the possibility of additional violence. And that's why I want to make this video. What I want to clear up is the false idea that violence against the wealthy would be a part of regular socialist society, because it simply wouldn't be. The main concern of socialism is equal democratic and economic power. A guaranteed higher standard of living coupled with a more extensive democracy. In this system, essentially, no one should get wealthy enough to exploit someone else and become democratically unaccountable.
This is, I don't know why more socialists don't harp on the fact that, like, socialism is like democracy too. You know what I mean? All these fucking liberals and, like, in the United States, Democrats and Republicans harp on the necessity for democracy and shit constantly. And when you really evaluate socialist concepts, it is really just expanding democracy into other aspects of our lives.
Businesses compete, the winners monopolize and oligopolize, and basic needs are gatekept while companies are given a license to destroy or appropriate common resources. The ultra-wealthy have an outsized influence in politics and in the workplace, and the entire economy is geared towards maximizing their ability to profit. In some cases, profit and human well-being go together. In most, not so much.
Yeah, I appreciated that he allowed for caveats. I think a lot of people, even on the left, 100%, are too black and white on issues to say that nothing good can ever come out of a profit-based system. I think isn't particularly useful. It's just that it mostly won't result in anything good happening, and that the things that do happen that are good sort of happen in spite of the profit-based system.
Under capitalism, what decides if something happens isn't popular approval, but profitability, which is determined by how much employers exploit their employees, how wealthy or desperate their consumers are, and even how recklessly they can destroy the environment.
Yeah, to an extent, I would grade that, mostly true, right? I think a capitalist here would argue that it's not just necessarily how much profit we derive. They would say there's an element of market demand that I think matters here as well, that I partially agree with, which is why I sort of lean in the camp of market socialism.
The idea is to stop all that by bringing the economy under democratic control. To have workers elect their boss, or choose to restructure their workplace entirely based on their expertise in actually doing the work. To have natural monopolies and other parts of the economy controlled by a democratic government. To have some market mechanisms not guided by profit. To replace private banks with public banks, with appointed or elected representatives. Instead of a board of directors trying to figure out how to make workers pee in more bottles, a democratic council would decide the best way to use something like Amazon's distribution network and algorithms to actually benefit society.
Could you fucking imagine, bro? Oh my god.
The point is, nothing happens to wealthy people under this arrangement. The rich are just not part of the plan. Not the individuals, they can stick around. But the idea of someone getting obscenely wealthy in this society seems pretty pointless.
Oh no. You know what? What happens to the rich under socialism, bro? They'll have to get to fucking work. God forbid.
And ideally impossible. As a real-life anecdote, look at how the last emperor of China was treated after their revolution. They didn't off the guy. They gave him a re-education, helped him understand why the position of emperor was outdated, and eventually he became a member of China's National People's Congress, helping to make progress alongside the very same people he had previously oppressed.
Wasn't this before China's socialist revolution? I really don't know. I know embarrassingly little about China's, recent national history. So tell me where I'm wrong. I don't know. Doesn't super matter.
Was reintegrated into a better society. In a future socialist system,
that sounds good.
The rich and powerful themselves would be fine. But most of the privileges and access to power that create billionaire levels of wealth just wouldn't exist. The only way to become incredibly wealthy in a socialist society is to have a unique set of skills, the way an actor or an athlete becomes incredibly wealthy under capitalism. Being basically irreplaceable might command a higher price for your labor. But even then, you'd still end up...
Wouldn't a capitalist argue that Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or whatever would fit under that same umbrella? This is not my argument. Please do not misconstrue what I'm trying to say. This is not how I would argue it, because the reality is that, I don't know, you're not brilliant for investing in an online marketplace. You were just the first person to do it. Being the one person who got lucky making a good investment when 99% of other people don't get lucky by making good investments isn't quite the same thing. I don't know. Someone elaborate further in the comments.
Up with a much more equal society. Some inequality might still persist, but at a much different scale and within a much, much smaller range. The difference between capitalism and...
That's the thing. And I think I talked about this in my intro or whatever, but I think a fallacy or, a misconception that people have about socialism is that it's when everyone gets the exact same thing under any circumstances. Not one person can have one thing more than anyone else. And that's just not true. It's more along the lines of what JT is saying here.
Socialism is that you wouldn't be able to get wealthy by paying workers less than the amount they bring in for your company. You couldn't gain wealth by exploitation, and that's it. You're still skeptical. No problem.
There was more things in there that I have question marks over, but overall, pretty good stuff.
There's another reason you shouldn't be worried about what happens to rich people under socialism. Most socialists are very anti-punishment. Just talk to your lefty friends and you'll see. Most socialists today are at the forefront of the restorative and transformative justice movements, as well as the prison abolition and anti-death penalty movements.
Yeah, the way we do prisons now is obviously unspeakably horrible. I feel like we're getting into semantics. Maybe we wouldn't call it prisons. What are we going to call it? Like community centers where you're forced to live there while you're being taught and rehabilitated. I've said this before, but prison should be more like school or an empathetic rehab center. Punitive approaches are not what works, clearly. But this is like semantics. We're just playing with words here. My point is, when people hear prison abolition, most people will think like, oh, so if someone commits murder, they should just be out on the street normally. And I don't think that's what anyone wants. It's more about rethinking how we do prisons, going away from punitive approaches to a more rehabilitative approach. That I believe in.
The most famous representative of this socialist position is probably someone like Angela Davis, who's campaigned for all of these causes for decades. The idea of punitive justice, or the eye for an eye logic that governs a lot of our justice system today, is deeply unpopular in the modern left. And one of the things that socialists are adamantly against.
That's putting it very mildly, right?
In parallel to socialist ideas about changing systems, we would much rather make crime less economically necessary or less enticing by ensuring everyone's needs are met unconditionally than by threatening people with a violent state apparatus. We would much
Very good points.
rather strip people of their power over others and institute a more developed democracy that extends to the workplace than allow a few to gain power through exploitation and punish them when they, predictably, use that power to those ends. Socialists promote structural change first and foremost, and are against punitive justice as a way to solve structural issues. The idea that this would just not apply to those who happen to be wealthy is possible, but realistically very unlikely. And of course, this isn't to say that a socialist society would be without the means to punish people who commit crimes. Historically, after every revolution, there have been elements, often funded by one of the capitalist powers, that tried to undermine the socialist project through acts of terror. This wouldn't be acceptable in a socialist society any more than it is in a capitalist one. Those people would still face the consequences of their actions, whatever those consequences are determined to be. But on the whole, the goal of socialist justice is to be more restorative than punitive, as we saw with the example of the Chinese emperor. I get that all this conflicts with the popular ideas most people have about socialism, but let's be clear.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm really glad that he's saying what most, if not all, socialists, leftists want today. I think a lot of people, liberals, conservatives, etc., would say, well, if you look at the way justice was dealt in a lot of these socialist regimes, it's not how he's describing it, how I described it. Let's leave it at most of these attempts at socialism thus far have had some pretty big issues in this regard. At least the major attempts at socialism that everyone knows about, you know what I mean?
Don't mistake eat the rich sweaters for a policy proposal. With so much violence committed by capitalists and their institutions against—
This is what I'm saying, dude. I say this every fucking video. The left's messaging is fucking awful, dude. But how do you solve the systemic problems that create horrible leeching rich people in 3 words? You can't. Leftist positions are nuanced. Compared to conservatives, we have a huge uphill battle with our messaging. Even going back just a couple minutes ago to abolish prisons. People, normies, liberals, conservatives, they're gonna hear that and think, holy shit, these leftists are fucking insane. You wanna abolish prisons? Defund the police? ACAB? All these terms that we use have real good meaning to them that I agree with. But the terms themselves, the slogans themselves are just bad. They're inaccessible. They're a huge hindrance to the modern leftist or progressive movement. Anyway.
Against the working class and the environment. It's understandable that anger will bubble up and find its expression in edgy slogans. But as far as solutions to capitalism's violence go, eat the rich isn't one of them. Eating the rich without changing the system that reproduces unaccountable billionaires isn't progress.
Yeah, put that on a fucking sign, bro.
It's just a funny quote. And just in case some of you try to misrepresent what I'm saying, none of this is to say that disruptive protests are illegitimate or anything. Civility and non-violent protests are a sacrifice protesters make. To go in front of armed police forces and refuse to punch back. No one should demand from those who are oppressed that they should continue being oppressed to stay legitimate and valid. This video isn't some kind of condemnation of all violence or an appeal to complacency. I'm simply clearing up the false idea that daily socialist operation depends on punishing the rich like many pundits seem to imply. The idea you have in your mind that socialists just want to bonk billionaires to solve the problems of capitalism is simply wrong. It's not a solution. Ending a system that produces billionaires is the #1 goal, not hurting people. We don't want jerks with the authority to change our understanding of what qualifies as a toilet. The problem is the system, not the jerks. Let's be even clearer. For someone uber wealthy under capitalism, life under socialism would be different. An end to exploitation and permanently rising inequality would certainly mean fewer privileges. Possibly or even probably a less important status. Certainly less power to boss people around. And most likely, less ability to enjoy excessive luxury at will.
I was gonna say, that right there was kind of the big hang-up. Not a hang-up, but kind of the thing I left out in my intro where I was like, what would change for, the ultra-rich? Yeah, I was a little bit, light on what I said would change. There would clearly be things that would change, but Do you need a fucking super yacht? I don't know. I'm a utilitarian, okay? I care about what's best for the most amount of people. Is it better if a few people have super yachts or if everyone has access to healthcare and education? What is better for humanity? That's all I care about. And in my opinion, that's what everyone should care about. And if you don't care about those things, if you're the billionaire who says, I would rather have a super yacht than allow you to have healthcare, then we as the masses should say, actually, no, we don't allow for that.
But that's probably it. Less power, less privilege, but a life that continues to be more than comfortable as the standards for all of society are raised.
Exactly,
Accountability
bro.
not to boards of directors, shareholders, and the market, but to a democratic workers' association. And perhaps most importantly, the opportunity to be
Markets can still exist under socialism. Don't worry, liberals and capitalists. This is another strategic thing that I think we should lean into. Markets could absolutely have their place in a socialist system, and it's what everyone knows today. Being more open to markets, I think, would make socialism more appealing to people. Maybe that's just my bias coming out, I don't know. I think distinguishing capitalism from markets is a very important thing for the left to do today. I think that would be very helpful in spreading these ideas, not dismissing markets entirely. Not to say that's what JT's doing.
a part of a new project that actually improves the conditions of our species. The thing all these billionaires claim to want to do.
Oh my god. What a fucking joke, dude. I don't know what kind of brain you gotta have, what level of smoothness, what you gotta have to trust billionaires that any of them actually give one single fuck about making the world a better place. Holy shit.
Under socialism, they could use that drive, if it's genuine, to really contribute. Socialism is the way forward, even if you're a billionaire.
Very, very good video, as always. This guy is so fucking good at distilling this stuff in a very palatable way. This is who everyone should be watching.